I want to bring up my brother, our friend, Reverend Dr. WillieDwayneFrancois. He is the president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equity. You can find them at theblackchurch.net. Look, Dallas Black Clergy, the Black Church Center, we're beginning to work together and we're going to collaborate. We're bringing this coalition in. You saw Phyllis Hill in our last conversation working with Faith in Action. They're becoming a part of this coalition. We're building a coalition of powerful people who love this kind of Jesus to do the work that God has called us to do. So without further ado, I want to introduce you all to my friend and my brother, Reverend Dr. WillieDwayneFrancois. Introduce yourself to the people and say hello, sir.
Thank you so much, Reverend Robinson, for gathering us today, for your leadership in moderating this conversation to these fantastic homiletical experts that you have in the Dallas area. Significant. I suspect that's why church still does well in places like Dallas, because you have the kind of raw and uncut gifts that we heard today. And Dr. Green has really set us up for expanding our economic imagination. So I'm just happy to be here, man. I'm in New Jersey right now, but I do want to say, because this is a Dallas call primarily, that I am a native of Galveston, Texas, and I spent a good number of my adult years in Houston. So although I'm on the East Coast right now, I still have Texas in my blood, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, Willie, look, we're not going to hold the people. I want to jump into this thing. Look, my Willie Francois, you can, I say, follow on IG, check him out. In my opinion, y'all know I don't lie, I don't make stuff up. And I don't, I don't give people titles just to give them to them. That's not my thing. But in my opinion, Reverend WillieDwayneFrancois is a public intellectual, one of the best and growing in our country, and one of our greatest preachers and pastors. And so I'm just so glad to have him here. And we've been thinking about this thing, man, this idea of modern monetary theory, and this idea, I called it, we trying to kick Dave Ramsey out of our churches. And so we've been thinking about this both on the economic level, on the theological level, on the just the human level. But I really want to just hit it with this question, man. The people don't know what modern monetary theory is. So I want you to give us a little bit of that. But I'm gonna lead into it with this question. And it's really simple, right? Like during this coronavirus moment, right? The federal government has put on display, right? And they have the power to basically create money, right, for public priorities, right? And the government's power to spend without tax offsets, right? We didn't have to raise taxes to put more money into the system, right? Yet Democratic Party leaders, right, seem wedded to the framework that maintains that the federal government has to tax, right, in order for us to spend more, right? Republicans, right, are believing in this money creation, but they believe that money should go to the people who already have money. and so talk to us about your thought processes around this current moment, this current anomaly, right, where we're seeing the federal government literally create money to take care of priorities, and how that can really move us into a new kind of economy if those funds are put into the right place and we really start thinking about this different. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. First, I want to start by saying that the voices and the thinkers that all of us need to pursue when thinking about modern monetary theory are economists like Stephanie Kelton, Derek Hamilton, and William Darity. And Darity just put out an amazing book on reparations. Probably will be considered a definitive book on Black reparations at some point if it hasn't already been acclaimed as such. And pastoral thinkers like Delman Coates, who has launched a movement called Our Money USA, which is invested in the idea of helping people reimagine money. Because if we reimagine money, particularly the creation of money or how money is produced, then we realize that we've been living amongst the sleeping giant of the people, the sleeping giant of the American government, the we the people, that has the power to solve all of the most pressing issues that we are up against. And the fundamental, and I want to be clear that a difference. And I think this gets Dave Ramsey out of our churches. One, because Dave Ramsey is interested in microeconomics. He's interested in household economics. How do I decrease all of the debt in my home? And Dave Ramsey, I don't think he has I think because of the lack of racial stamina that most white people have, he doesn't even have the awareness to think about how debt is in the very DNA of what money is in this country, right? 90+% of what we consider money in this country is actually debt that's produced by banks. When banks make loans, that's what we think of as money. So most of what we think of as money is inherently debt, right? And so Dave Ramsey.
Hold up. I would say don't run past that, right? Real quick for us, Reverend Francois, because Black people and our relation to debt, right, is a very interesting thing in the country. So give us a little more on that. Keep hitting us with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of thinking about the mechanics of banks, that most of what's in circulation, most of the money that's in circulation is actually bank created money, privatized money that is in circulation as a result of loans, right? And while Black people have a particular relationship to indebtedness, white people are also deeply indebted or deeply depend on money that's created by banks, because that's just the nature of our system right now. And modern monetary theory wants to make the case. I'm not an expert in modern monetary theory. I espouse it. I'm an activist in the tradition, but I'm not a theorist in that particular tradition. But I do find it to be true. And at its core, what it says is that a sovereign government that issues its own money cannot run out of money. A government that issues its own money can create money, and it's effective and it is sufficient as long as it doesn't exceed levels of inflation, right? And the economists will have to give us, the economists can think through what the levels of inflation are. But what it suggests is that a government does not work the way a household works. I'm talking about a government that issues its own money does not work the way a household or a person or a business works. Businesses are on budgets. Households are on budgets. The American government, as a sovereign currency issuer, does not have to live on the budget with the same kinds of restraints that a household and a business has to live on, because it issues the money, right? I was going to say, make that make sense for us, right? Because most of us don't really understand the difference between why we hear the word budget, right? Like balance the budget and all this. So we don't understand the difference between our household budget and like a government sovereign nation's budget. So make that make sense for us. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the chief ways of thinking about this is you don't create your own money at home. We are depending on money that has been issued outside of us. We depend on money that's either been created by a bank, right? That's the really only way we think about money right now. So the money that we are spending, the money that maintains our household, to pay bills, to pay the mortgage, is based on what is coming in. You don't have the capacity, unless you want to go to prison, to create your own money. And if you created money, it wouldn't be worth much, right? And if you try to create your own currency outside of counterfeit American currency, which you can't get away with counterfeit either, we don't have that capacity. But the American government has the capacity to it produces its own money. Therefore, these are really complex concepts that I don't want to get into the weeds with right now. But I do want to be clear that as a sovereign issuer of its own resource, of its own money, the government can produce as much money as it needs to solve its problems or to meet its particular concerns. Here's some examples of that. We just saw the COVID, and you said that there's something unusual about it happening right now. But it's actually not as unusual as we think. What's unusual is that it's being framed that the money that's being created is going towards people. It's going towards domestic issues. But the reality is that this country always has spent money without figuring out how to pay for it. And generally that happens during war, right? I don't ever, you are a vet, bro. I don't ever remember, and maybe I'm too young, I never remember any legislator, any president saying, well, how are we going to pay to drop these bombs in Iraq? Where are we going to find the money to drop these bombs in Afghanistan? No, it creates the money at the stroke of a key to handle the issue of war. So what many are thinking is that, well, we need to always think of ourselves as a wartime economy, because that if we really want to combat this war on poverty and not a war on the poor, which we have been under for the past 60 plus years, if we really want a war on poverty, then we see, as we've seen in this COVID crisis, that this country, the same way it produces money at the stroke of a key for war, is the same way it can produce money at the stroke of a key for everyday people. The problem with how it has created money in this COVID crisis is fundamentally connected to it. It has become corporate socialism. It has bailed out billionaires, bailed out corporations, and it has given scraps and pennies to small business and American people. But it dramatizes, it demonstrates that this country can create money for what it values other than war.
So what I'm hearing you say then, right, if I can understand this in my household budget concept, is that what you're fundamentally saying is my household budget is based upon how much money I can get from the banks, fundamentally, right? And how much money I can get from the banks, whether it's through my job, whether it's through my occupation, whatever it is, how much money can I get, and then how can I budget that out? But what you're saying about a sovereign government who literally creates its own money is that this isn't where can I get money from? This is how can I create enough money to actually solve the real problems that we have, right? Because we have the ability.
And here's what's underneath this, and I meant to get to this earlier, is that the way that, economic orthodoxy right now is still functioning as if our country is on the gold standard. And we've not been on the gold standard since 1971, since the early 1970s. I know Dr. Green can surely clarify that for us. But the gold standard meant that U.S. currency was somewhere backed up by gold, backed up by some commensurate resource that shored up his money. Well, because we're no longer on the gold standard, that idea of that pay-go process, we have to figure out how we pay for it. Let's raise taxes, or let's cut from social. Democrats, let's raise taxes to pay for it. Republicans, let's cut the social safety net to pay for it. Well, that's living under the assumption that we're still on the gold standard, that the money that we're spending is actually in a vault somewhere. The money that we're spending is actually backed up by gold somewhere. It's just not true. We're no longer on the gold standard, and we haven't been on the gold standard for our entire lives. And we were off the gold standard 15 years before I was born. So this idea that this pay for question, this how we're going to pay for it, is living in this economic orthodoxy, which is a myth, that the money is somewhere backed up and that the government doesn't have the power as we have seen in wartime, and as we see right now during this COVID crisis, that it can create trillions and trillions of dollars at the stroke of a key.
So then this fundamentally, what you're saying then is this changes our orientation to money, right?
It fundamentally changes our relationship to money. I mean, it does, but I want to be clear that this country lives on debt. Like this idea that even how we talk about the national debt is a red herring to some extent, which is why no one raises the questions about raising the national debt for particular types of priorities is when you want to create money for poor folk, when you want to create money to build a sturdy economic floor, right? And when you start asking them to lay down the firm tiles of the economic floor of this country, that's when they say, no, we can't do it. But when we want to bolster the militarist prowess, right, the white militarist prowess of this country, then there is no end to where the money comes from and where the money is. Yeah. So I mean, this country depends on debt. I mean, this country depends on debt. And the reality is let's think. I mean, Delman helped me to think about this way. Let's say that we're a nation of 10 people, right? And whether we get the nation from 10 people, and we all borrow, the 10 of us borrow $1,000 from this bank, right? We get our money from this bank because this nation's getting started. We borrow this money, this $10,000 from the bank, and they give us some arbitrary interest rate, let's say 10%. We have no money. We're a new country. It's only 10 of us. We get this $1,000 from the bank. They say, okay, you got $1,000, but you owe now this extra 10%, which means that's another $100 on top of the $1,000 that you have, which means across the 10 of us, there's $11,000 in circulation, right? No, there's $10,000 in circulation, but we owe $11,000. And the question is, where's that money going to come from if there's only $10,000 in circulation, but because we loaned it and the bank taxed us on money that they created for free, that now we each owe $1,100. What does that tell us? It tells us that in a debt-based economy, there actually is no way for everybody to get out of debt because the money is not there. What's there is the principal, not the interest. And so that is why our economy is that is why so many of us are scrapping and competing. And that is why we live with types of hopelessness, right? Because the American dream can't be real if what we actually owe because of the debt is not in circulation.
Wow. So fundamentally,
so we need the government to make money for people. And not just for itself, to make money in public interest, to make money to cover things like free healthcare, to cover things like free college, free education from K through college, to cover things like a universal job guarantee, like the Green New Deal, right? That has living wages connected to it. We need things like even what Andrew Yang has been pushing forward, a universal basic income, or I would prefer more a guaranteed basic income, right? The government has to use public spending, pumping money into the people to solve for the fact that we are all living on debt, even if we're not all living in debt.
Wow. I can, like, what my mama used to simply say, you can't get blood from a turnip, right? Like if there's nothing like this very simple idea that that you're really laying out for us, making sure I'm not frozen. This very simple idea that it seems like you're laying out for us is this, that if we are going to reorient ourselves to a new economy, we first must need to understand just how is money working, right? And money is working in our system, not in a way where this dollar bill that I have, right, or the numbers that are on the screen in my account, they actually don't translate to some other money or some other resource, right, that is somewhere else. They simply
maybe Dr. Green knows where it is.
They simply stand for my ability to be able to give you the amount of numbers that you're asking for in order to get the resource that I need.
It's kind of like receipts almost. I also want to say this about debt, right? So what 2008 horrible crash, and the crazy thing is that the industry that sent the country down was even larger in 2008 than it was in 2007, right? When everything starts happening. In the past 12 years, this country has gone from about 4 trillion in individual debt to now I think we're about 12 trillion in individual debt, right? the country, it feeds on capitalism in many ways, depends on that, particularly our form of capitalism, depends on deep indebtedness.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing you say is our country has actually been operating in this way, right? And I think this is what everyone has been saying, right? You know, Bernie's been saying this. People have been saying this for years, right? And you named it, like this corporate socialism, where our country has actually been functioning this way. When money has been needed, we've created money. We just simply have not put that money into the hands, into the pockets of the people who need them. More importantly, we haven't targeted that money to the actual things that are tearing our country apart. Poverty, education disparities, homelessness, joblessness, right? Healthcare disparities, and on and on and on. It to the point, what I'm hearing you say is when we're talking about we need money for the ACA or the Affordable Care Act, right? This isn't a question of do we need to raise taxes? This is a question of, well, why don't we do the same thing we do when we're getting ready to go to war?
Yes, I think
education and so on and so forth.
That's the leading assumption that I'm operating with. And there has to be, so not only do we need public spending to work our way towards equity, but there also needs to be some real checks on the bank. One of my biggest concerns with Bernie is that he talks about breaking up the banks, but he doesn't really seem to have a full grasp of what that can actually mean, right? Because right now, the banks are loaning money that do not exist. They're creating money at the stroke of the key. And if the banks fail, the government is bailing them out. So literally, there's this cycle here of banks that are creating money out of thin air, right? And then they know they can be bailed out at any moment.
Yeah.
By the federal government.
Wow. And it's really
there's no check on the banks. There's no check on the banks. And so the banks can keep us deeply indebted and keep us in a type of economic bondage. And we don't see it as bondage because we believe, because, well, I have this house. This house is the materialization of that loan. But the house was created by money that was created at the stroke of a key.
Wow. Man.
But you got to pay it back with the interest. And it's not just paying back the principal, it's you got to pay back the arbitrary interest that allows the banks to do what? To privatize all the rewards and socialize all the risk.